The library was Callum's sanctuary, not the public kind with stern librarians and signs imploring visitors for silence. No, this was his personal domain, a maze of towering shelves and dust-filled corridors that snaked through the old, creaky manor he had inherited from an aunt so peculiar no one dared to mention her name. Some people collected coins or stamps. Callum collected stories. His library wasn't just a place to read. It was an entire world, a labyrinth of boundless imagination and forgotten histories. And lately, that world had started to behave strangely. It began innocently enough. Books he was sure he had placed on one shelf would mysteriously show up on another. Dog-eared pages would smooth themselves out, as if caught in the act of mischief. At first, Callum chalked it up to his haphazard filing system, creative chaos, as he liked to call it. After all, anyone could misplace a book or two in a collection spanning tens of thousands. But then there was the incident. That evening, Callum had spent hours hunting for his prized first edition of Dune. He scoured the classics section, the precariously balanced tower of science fiction anthologies, and even the dreaded books I swear I'll read someday pile. When he finally found it lying open on the floor, he froze. There was no folded page, no bookmark to indicate where it had been. It was simply open, as though it had been read. He frowned at it. "You've got some nerve," he muttered, half to himself, half to the library. The thing about living alone is that when strange things happen, there's no one else to blame. No mischievous roommates. No curious kids. Just Callum, standing there like the world's least competent detective. He snapped the book shut with a decisive thud, placed it back on the shelf, and resolved to stop eating late-night snacks. But the oddities didn't stop there. Books began to rearrange themselves in ways that bordered on mischievous. A dusty tome on early civilizations appeared nestled between volumes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A biography of Marie Curie somehow found its way into the romance section, where a faded cardboard sign labeled "Sappy Nonsense" hung in defiance. When his copy of 1984 turned up in the children's section, Callum decided enough was enough. "All right," he announced to the empty room, hands on his hips. "This has gone beyond weird and straight into paranormal territory. If you're a ghost, your taste in pranks is terrible. And if you're some kind of sentient mold, I've got bleach, and I'm not afraid to use it." The silence that followed was so profound it felt as though the room was holding its breath. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Callum armed himself with a thermos of coffee, an old mop handle, and a flashlight. He settled into the reading nook in the farthest corner of the library, where he could monitor the major sections without being easily seen. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The only sounds were the occasional creak of floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Callum was starting to feel foolish. Perhaps it really was just his imagination, or drafty windows and uneven floors. That's when the shimmer appeared. It began as a faint distortion in the air, like the heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. Callum blinked, wondering if the caffeine was messing with his eyes. But the shimmer grew stronger, rippling through the air just above the poetry section. Slowly, impossibly, it coalesced into a pool of liquid gold, suspended in midair. Callum's jaw dropped. Well, that's new. Before he could decide whether to poke it with the mop, run for his life, or just keep staring, the pool began to stretch and widen. A soft hum filled the air, low and resonant, like the hum of a tuning fork. Then, with a soft pop, a figure stepped through. She was taller than any human Callum had ever seen. Her skin shimmered in shades of lavender and silver, shifting with the dim light. Her hair, if it could be called hair, floated around her head like wisps of translucent silk underwater. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like those of an insect, held an unsettling warmth. She wore flowing garments that shifted colors with her movements, and in one hand, she carried a slender device that pulsed faintly with blue light. Callum did the only thing that came to mind. He raised the mop handle like a sword. "All right, Space Lady," he declared. "Explain yourself," and put down the ray gun or whatever that is. The alien, or whatever she was, tilted her head, her expression one of mild amusement. When she spoke, her voice was melodic and calm, tinged with academic curiosity. "Forgive me, is this not the place of stories?" Callum blinked. "The place of this is a library, yeah, but it's my library. And last I checked, it wasn't a galactic bus stop." The alien's head tilted further. "Galactic? Bus stop?" "Look," Callum said, still clutching the mop. "You're not borrowing books without a library card. That's non-negotiable." The alien stepped closer, her glowing eyes scanning the shelves. "Your classification system is inefficient," she said thoughtfully, "but the selection is impressive." "May I?" Callum stared at her, uncomprehending. "May you what?" She gestured toward a nearby shelf. "Partake." "Wait." Callum squinted at her. "Are you telling me you're some sort of intergalactic book nerd?" "In a manner of speaking," she replied. "I am Lirien, an anthropologist from the Lirien Consortium. I specialize in cultural artifacts. Your literature fascinates us. It is chaotic, diverse, beautiful." Callum lowered the mop a fraction. "Did you just call Earth chaotic?" Lirien nodded solemnly. "Indeed. Your organizational skills leave much to be desired." Callum sighed, letting the mop fall to his side. "Okay, Space Lady, you've got 2 minutes to explain yourself before I don't know who I'd call, but someone would probably take this seriously." Lirien's iridescent features shifted in what might have been a smile. "I would be delighted to explain. But first, may I borrow a volume? Perhaps something ironic?" Callum groaned. "This is going to be a long night." Callum was not ready for this. The mop now leaned uselessly against a shelf as Lirien, the alien anthropologist, stood in front of him, scanning his precious collection of books with an expression that could only be described as reverent. He had just barely come to terms with the fact that she was real and not a hallucination caused by too much caffeine and dust. And now she wanted to borrow something? "Okay," Callum began, rubbing his temples. "Let me get this straight. You came here, through some kind of portal thing, just to read books?" "Yes," Lirien replied serenely, tracing her elongated fingers across the spine of a battered copy of Frankenstein. "Your written works are a gateway to understanding your species." "I could not resist." Callum crossed his arms. "Couldn't resist? You make it sound like you're browsing a candy store." She tilted her head, her glowing, multifaceted eyes regarding him curiously. "Is that not what this is?" "No, this is." He gestured wildly at the shelves. "This is a library, a sacred space. You don't just waltz in here uninvited, rearrange my books, and act like it's a buffet of human knowledge." Lirien's translucent hair rippled, as though caught in an invisible breeze. "I meant no offense," she said, her tone as calm as ever. "I only sought to organize your collection in a more logical fashion. The random placement of volumes is," she hesitated, as though searching for the right word, "disorienting." Callum threw his hands up. "It's not random. It's creative chaos. I know where everything is. Well, I did until you started moving things around." Lirien's eyes glimmered, and for the first time, Callum thought he detected something resembling sheepishness. "I see. You are attached to your methods. I shall refrain from further alterations." Callum pinched the bridge of his nose. "Thanks, I guess." He slumped into his favorite armchair, the one tucked into the far corner of the library, and gestured for Lirien to sit down, or at least do something other than loom over his books like an intergalactic librarian. She obliged, gracefully lowering herself to the floor in a cross-legged position. "So," Callum said after a moment, "you're some kind of alien researcher?" "Yes," Lirien replied. "An anthropologist. I study the cultural artifacts of developing civilizations. Your planet's literature is a remarkable resource, so varied, so emotive. It reveals much about your species' values, conflicts, and aspirations." Callum blinked. "And you decided my library was the best place for this study?" "You possess a unique collection," Lirien said simply. "It is both vast and eclectic. The portal seeks out locations rich in intellectual energy. Your library was a natural conduit." "Intellectual energy?" Callum repeated, frowning. "Are you saying my books are radioactive or something?" Lirien smiled faintly. "Not radioactive. Resonant. They carry the imprints of countless minds. Authors, readers, dreamers. Together, They form a tapestry of thought, which my people find irresistible. Callum stared at her, unsure whether to be flattered or freaked out. Okay, fine. Let's say I buy all that. What happens now? You're just going to sit here and read for the rest of the night? That is the plan, yes, Lirien said, her tone suggesting that she saw no problem with this. Callum sighed, leaning back in his chair. Well, if you're going to stick around, we're going to need some ground rules. Lirien perked up. Rules? Yeah, rules, Callum said, pulling a notepad and a pen from the side table. He began scribbling furiously. Rule 1. No rearranging the books. Rule 2. No borrowing anything without asking me first. And Rule 3. He hesitated, glancing at her shimmering form. Try not to break anything? Lirien nodded solemnly. Understood. May I suggest a rule as well? Callum raised an eyebrow. You want to make a rule? You're the one trespassing, remembers? Nonetheless, Lirien said, I believe it would be beneficial. Rule 4. You must allow me to share some of my knowledge in return. Callum froze mid-scribble. Wait, what kind of knowledge are we talking about here? Theoretical sciences, historical archives, artistic traditions, Lirien replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. I would not impose without offering something in exchange. Callum set the pen down, staring at her. You're telling me you've got alien knowledge, and you're just going to hand it over? Like some kind of cosmic book trade? Precisely, Lirien said, her translucent hair shimmering as she nodded. It is only fair. Callum blinked again, unsure if he was dreaming or if this was, in fact, the most surreal night of his life. Okay, he said finally. Let's start with something simple. Do you have like a library card or something where you're from? Lirien's expression grew thoughtful. Not in the sense you mean. Our knowledge is communal, shared freely among all. But I suppose I could craft one if it would make you more comfortable. Callum laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Great. My library now has a space alien with a membership card. What's next? At that moment, a loud thud echoed through the library. Callum shot to his feet, grabbing the mop handle. What was that? Lirien tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. It appears we are not alone. Not alone, Callum hissed. What does that mean? Did you bring friends? No, Lirien replied, rising gracefully to her feet. But the portal is still active. Something, or someone may have followed me through. Callum groaned, clutching the mop like his life depended on it. Of course this is happening. I can't even have one peaceful alien invasion without things getting worse. Lirien turned toward the poetry section, where the golden shimmer of the portal was faintly visible. Stay here, she said. Like hell I'm staying here, Callum muttered, trailing after her. The two approached the portal cautiously, Callum's heart pounding in his chest. The shimmering light seemed to pulse with a strange energy, casting eerie shadows across the shelves. And then, with a sound like a soft whoosh, something stepped through. Callum tightened his grip on the mop, his knuckles white. Please tell me that's not a space monster. Lirien didn't respond immediately, her glowing eyes fixed on the figure emerging from the portal. It was small, no taller than a child, with smooth, metallic skin that gleamed like polished chrome. Its large, round eyes blinked at them curiously. What is it? Callum whispered. Lirien's expression softened. A juvenile Altherian. A curious one, by the look of it. The creature chirped, a series of high-pitched sounds that made Callum wince. Lirien knelt, speaking to it in a language that sounded like a blend of musical notes and static. The creature chirped again, then scurried toward the nearest shelf, its tiny hands reaching for a brightly colored children's book. Wait! Callum shouted. That's my signed copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Lirien turned to him, a faint smile on her iridescent face. It seems your library is more popular than you thought. Callum groaned, leaning heavily on the mop. This is going to be a very long night. Callum couldn't believe his eyes. The tiny metallic creature, which Lirien had called a juvenile Altherian, was now curled up in the corner of the children's section, engrossed in The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Its chrome-like hands carefully turned each page, its glowing blue eyes widening with what could only be described as pure joy. "This," Callum muttered, dragging his mop behind him like a defeated knight, "is officially the weirdest night of my life. And that includes the time I got locked in here for 3 hours with that raccoon." Lirien glanced up from her crouched position near the portal, which she was now examining with her strange, glowing device. "Your frustration is noted, Callum. However, it seems the Altherian means no harm. Its kind are naturally curious, especially about visual storytelling. They are drawn to imagery, drawn to weight." Callum pointed at the creature, who chirped happily and tapped the illustration of the caterpillar munching on a slice of watermelon. "You're telling me that thing traveled across dimensions to look at picture books?" "Yes," Lirien said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. Callum slumped into his armchair, running a hand through his messy hair. "I can't. I just can't. You've got portals, sentient alien toddlers, and now my library is turning into some kind of intergalactic daycare." Lirien rose gracefully, her glowing device emitting a faint hum. "The portal appears to have destabilized," she said, her serene demeanor unshaken. "It will remain active for a few more hours at most. During that time, other beings may wander through." Callum shot up from his chair. "Other beings? You're telling me more of your space buddies could just pop in for story time?" "Possibly," Lirien said, "but the Altherian is harmless. Its kind are explorers, not aggressors. If anything, you should be flattered." "Flattered," Callum repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, nothing boosts the ego like an alien kid raiding your library for picture books." The Altherian chirped again, holding the book up to Callum like it wanted him to explain the next part of the story. Its tiny, metallic face glimmered in the dim light, and for a brief moment, Callum felt a twinge of something resembling affection. "Fine," he grumbled, taking the book and flipping to the next page. "But if you drool on it, you're paying for the damages. Or, Lirien is, I guess. Do you even have money? Is space money a thing?" Lirien watched with mild amusement as Callum began reading the book aloud. The Altherian leaned closer, its glowing eyes fixed on the illustrations like they held the secrets of the universe. Just as Callum reached the part where the caterpillar eats through a cupcake, a sausage, and a lollipop, another soft whoosh echoed through the library. "Oh no," Callum groaned, clutching the book to his chest. "Not again." The portal shimmered, its golden ripples expanding slightly, and out stepped a creature unlike anything Callum had ever seen. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with sleek, obsidian-black skin that glistened like polished stone. Its elongated limbs ended in clawed fingers, and its glowing orange eyes flicked between Callum, Lirien, and the Altherian. Callum instinctively grabbed the mop again. "Lirien," he hissed, "tell me that's another harmless explorer." Lirien's expression remained calm, though her iridescent features tensed slightly. "It is a Zarnan hunter," she said, her melodic voice unusually grave. "A hunter?" Callum's grip on the mop tightened. "What's it hunting?" The Zarnan turned its glowing eyes toward the Altherian, who squeaked in alarm and ducked behind Callum's chair. "Oh, come on," Callum exclaimed. "You're telling me this thing came here to chase a shiny alien toddler? This isn't a library anymore. It's a sci-fi episode of Tom and Jerry." The Zarnan took a step closer, its claws flexing. Lirien moved swiftly, positioning herself between the hunter and the Altherian. "This is neutral ground," she said firmly, her voice carrying an authoritative tone that made even Callum sit up straighter. "You have no claim here, Zarnan." The hunter hissed, its deep, guttural voice resonating through the room. "The Altherian is mine." It crossed into forbidden space. "Not anymore," Lirien replied, her glowing device pulsing with blue light. "It is under my protection, and this is Callum's library." Callum blinked. "Wait, why are you dragging me into this? I don't want to be in charge of an intergalactic custody dispute." The Zarnan snarled, its orange eyes narrowing. "You would challenge a Zarnan hunter?" Lirien didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to Callum and said calmly, "Do you have any kind of containment unit?" "Containment unit?" Callum repeated. "What do you think this is, a science lab? The best I've got is a Tupperware lid and a strong sense of denial. Lirien sighed. Then we must rely on ingenuity. Callum distracted? Distracted? With what? Improvise, Lirien said, already moving toward the portal with the Altherian in tow. Callum looked around wildly. His gaze landed on a nearby stack of books, and he grabbed the first one that came to hand, a massive hardcover copy of War and Peace. He turned back to the Zarnin, gripping the book like a weapon. "All right, you big creepy. Whatever you are," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Let's see how you handle some classic Russian literature." The Zarnin growled, crouching as if preparing to lunge. Callum yelped and hurled the book with all his might. It smacked into the creature's chest with a heavy thud. To his surprise, the Zarnin stumbled backward, momentarily stunned. "Huh!" Callum shouted, grabbing another book. "Guess you're not much of a Tolstoy fan, huh?" The Zarnin snarled, regaining its footing, but before it could advance, Lirien's device emitted a high-pitched whine. The portal flared brighter, and with a sudden pulse of energy, the Zarnin was pulled backward, its claws scraping against the floor as it was sucked back through the golden rift. Then, just as abruptly as it had opened, the portal flickered and vanished, leaving the library eerily quiet. Callum collapsed into his chair, breathing heavily. What just happened?" Lirien approached, the Altherian peeking out from behind her. "The portal destabilized completely," she said. "It will not reopen here." "Good," Callum muttered, dropping the mop and glaring at Lirien. "Because I've had enough interdimensional drama for one night." The Altherian chirped softly, holding up the very hungry caterpillar like it wanted him to keep reading. Callum groaned. "Oh no, we're not doing this again. I'm not running a library/daycare for alien toddlers." Lirien's serene smile returned. "Perhaps not, but you have proven yourself to be an excellent host. Your adaptability is impressive, Callum." "Yeah, well," Callum muttered, slumping deeper into his chair. "Next time, bring a guest book. Or better yet, don't bring any guests at all." The Altherian chirped again, and despite himself, Callum couldn't help but crack a small, reluctant smile. This was going to be a long, strange chapter in his life. The following morning, Callum's library looked as though it had survived a minor earthquake. Books were scattered across the floor, shelves had been shoved askew, and a faint smell of ozone lingered in the air where the portal had closed. Callum sipped his now lukewarm coffee, surveying the damage with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "I'm a librarian, not a cosmic zookeeper." The Altherian juvenile, who had apparently decided to stay for breakfast, chirped happily as it paged through Good Night Moon. It had pulled the armchair closer to Callum's desk, creating what it must have thought was a cozy reading corner. Lirien, meanwhile, was busy rearranging the scattered books, though her methods were unorthodox. She seemed to think that books about Earth warfare belonged next to children's fairy tales, and that biographies should share shelf space with cookbooks. "That doesn't go there," Callum grumbled, snatching a copy of Moby Dick from her hands. "Your system is inefficient," Lirien said with a calm shrug. "Perhaps you should consider a thematic categorization that spans multiple dimensions. For instance, organizing texts by the emotional resonance of their protagonists." Callum stared at her blankly. "Organizing books by feelings? Are you trying to give me an aneurysm?" Before Lirien could respond, a soft chime filled the air, making the Altherian perk up and tilt its shiny head. Callum instinctively reached for his mop, the sound reminding him too much of the portal from the night before. "Relax," Lirien said, holding up her glowing device. "It's not another portal. It's my guide." "Your what?" She tapped a button on the device, and a translucent hologram materialized above it, displaying a swirling map filled with strange, glowing symbols. The map rotated slowly, casting faint light over the room. "This is my intergalactic catalog of cultural relics and artifacts," she explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It scans environments for significant cultural objects and organizes them for study. Last night, it detected a high concentration of unique texts in your library." Callum squinted at the map. "So you mean my books?" "Precisely." "That's not comforting," he muttered. You're treating my collection like it's some kind of alien tourist attraction. Lirien smiled faintly. Your collection is extraordinary, Callum. Few planets have amassed such a chaotic yet insightful anthology of their history, creativity, and philosophies. Even fewer have done so in such disorganized splendor. Gee, thanks, Callum said dryly. The Lirien chirped, hopping out of the armchair and scuttling over to the hologram. It pointed at a glowing section on the map, making a series of happy, whirring noises. What's it saying? Callum asked. It's expressing interest in that cluster, Lirien replied. It seems to have found a section of your library particularly fascinating. Callum leaned in, frowning as the hologram highlighted a corner of the library. His heart sank when he recognized the section. Oh no, not that shelf. What is it? That's the random weird stuff section, Callum admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Books that don't fit anywhere else. A lot of them are old, strange donations. I barely know what half of them are about. Lirien's glowing eyes lit up with curiosity. Fascinating. Perhaps they contain hidden insights into your species' psyche. Or they're just garbage, Callum muttered. But sure, go ahead. Dig through the pile of misfits. The Lirien didn't need further encouragement. It scuttled over to the section, climbing up a low shelf to inspect a battered copy of 101 Practical Uses for Duct Tape. Callum sighed. Great, my library's finest hour. But Lirien's attention had shifted. She knelt down, carefully pulling a small, leather-bound book from the shelf. Its cover was blank, but an odd, silvery script shimmered faintly under the dim light. This is intriguing, she murmured, turning the book over in her hands. Callum frowned. That thing? I've never seen it before. Must have been in the donation pile. Lirien opened the book, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. The pages were filled with writing that seemed to shift and shimmer as she stared at it, the words refusing to stay in place. This is not ordinary, she said softly. Well, yeah, Callum said, crossing his arms. That's why it's in the random weird stuff section. No, Lirien said, standing up abruptly. I mean, this is not of your world. Callum froze. What do you mean, not of my world? Are you saying that's an alien book? Lirien nodded, her expression unusually serious. This script is Arendari, a language known only to my people. This book shouldn't be here. Callum stared at the book, a chill running down his spine. Okay, so how did it get here? Lirien didn't answer immediately. Instead, she flipped through the pages, her iridescent brow furrowing. Finally, she looked up. It must have come through a portal, she said. But not recently. This book is old, very old. Whoever brought it here has long since departed. Callum felt his stomach twist. So you're telling me someone or something was messing around in my library before last night? It's possible, Lirien said. Or it could have been left here intentionally. Intentionally? For who? She met his eyes, her glowing gaze steady. Perhaps for you? Callum let out a nervous laugh. Yeah, sure. Because when aliens think of sending important intergalactic artifacts, the first place they think of is my library. Lirien didn't laugh. Instead, she closed the book and held it out to him. Regardless, it is here now, and it may hold answers, if you are willing to seek them. Callum hesitated, staring at the mysterious book as if it might bite him. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he took it from her hands. Fine, he said, but if this thing starts glowing or summoning space demons, I'm blaming you. The Lirien chirped in agreement, clutching its duct tape book like a prize. Lirien smiled faintly. That is fair, but I suspect this is only the beginning of your journey, Callum. Your library may hold more secrets than you realize. Callum groaned, already dreading what might come next. Great. Just what I needed, more mysteries. Can't wait to see what else decides to crawl through the shelves. He glanced at the Lirien, who was now trying to mimic the caterpillar's movements from earlier by squirming on the floor. Yep, he muttered. Totally normal day. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling light into the dusty, chaotic labyrinth of Callum's library, the strange little trio began their work, unraveling the secrets of the book and whatever strange forces had brought it there. The silver-scripted book felt heavy in Callum's hands, not physically, but in a way that made his chest tighten with unease. Its presence in his library was wrong, foreign, yet undeniably purposeful. Lirien, her presence equally unearthly, watched him with calm intensity, her glowing silver eyes sharp against the dim light. She perched elegantly in an armchair, the flowing white strands of her hair, cascading over her shoulders like river currents, gathered intricately into braids that framed her porcelain-like face. Her military-style jacket, practical and adorned with strange symbols and leather straps, made her seem at once scholarly and prepared for battle. The Altherian chirped and scuttled around like an overeager puppy, but Callum barely noticed. He couldn't take his eyes off Lirien, the alien anthropologist who had somehow made herself at home in his chaotic world of books. "Well," Callum said, breaking the silence as he ran a hand through his messy brown hair. "Let's see what kind of trouble this thing's going to cause." "Well," Callum said, breaking the silence. "Let's see what kind of trouble this thing's going to cause." He opened the book. The shifting words on the pages seemed to leap and rearrange themselves, forming coherent sentences in his native language. The first line froze him in place. "To the keeper of stories, prepare yourself. This library is the gateway." Callum blinked. "The gateway to what?" he muttered aloud. Lirien leaned over his shoulder, her iridescent face tense. "It's a warning," she said softly. "Or perhaps an invitation." Before Callum could respond, the room began to tremble. Books rattled on their shelves, and the faint hum of energy filled the air. The Altherian screeched and darted behind an overturned chair. "What did you do?" Callum shouted at Lirien, clutching the book tightly as a golden shimmer began to spread from its pages, filling the room with pulsating light. "I did nothing," Lirien snapped. "This is the book reacting to you." The light spread faster, washing over the bookshelves and walls. The library groaned as though it were alive. Callum stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the air itself seemed to ripple and bend. The shimmering light twisted into a large, circular shape, another portal, but larger and more intense than the one Lirien had arrived through. "Is this normal for alien books?" Callum shouted, shielding his eyes. "No," Lirien replied, her voice tight. "This portal is ancient. It's been dormant for centuries, waiting for someone to activate it. And now you have." The portal stabilized, revealing a swirling void of stars and endless darkness. Then, something began to emerge. At first, it was a single shadow, elongated and unsteady. Then more followed. Figures with tall, angular bodies and shimmering skin stepped through the portal, their glowing eyes scanning the library with an unnerving calm. They resembled Lirien, though their presence felt colder, more deliberate. "Who are they?" Callum asked, gripping the book tightly. "They are a render," Lirien whispered. "My people. But they are not here to read, Callum." One of the Arrenders stepped forward, his gaze landing on the silver book in Callum's hands. "Keeper," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You have activated the gateway. Surrender the artifact, and we will leave your world untouched." "Untouched?" Callum snapped. "You barge into my library, freak me out, and threaten my planet? Forget it." The Arrender tilted his head, unimpressed. "The gateway is not meant for your kind. It is a doorway to knowledge beyond your comprehension. You are unworthy to wield it." Lirien stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. Her long silver braids shifted with her movement, glowing faintly in the golden light pouring from the portal. She looked like a figure out of myth, part warrior, part scholar. Yet there was an unmistakable warmth in her expression as she shielded Callum. "This man is the rightful keeper of this library," she said firmly, her melodic voice ringing out. "He didn't choose this, but he is no less worthy than you or I." The leader regarded her with disdain. "You've spent too much time among them, Lirien. Their chaos has infected your judgment." Callum's grip on the book tightened as he looked from Lirien to the portal and back to the Arrender. "Okay, let me get this straight," he said, his voice rising. "You want this book because it's some kind of key to what? Infinite knowledge? Universal secrets?" The Arrender nodded. "The gateway holds the collective wisdom of countless worlds. It is a power too great for your primitive species." Callum's temper flared. Primitive? Listen here, pal. This primitive species invented pizza and jazz, so show some respect. The Lirien chirped in agreement, peeking out from behind its chair. Lirien perched on the arm of a chair as Callum began shelving books, the faint silver glow of her hair catching the library's soft lamplight. She held a thick volume in her hands, reading with the same focused intensity she had the first night they met. You know, Callum said, glancing over at her, you look way too at home here for someone who's not from this planet. Lirien smiled faintly, her silver eyes never leaving the text. Perhaps your library is where I was meant to be all along. No, it doesn't, Callum said firmly. He looked at Lirien. You said this book was left here intentionally, right? For a keeper? Lirien nodded. Yes. Whoever left it believed you, or someone like you would protect it. Callum swallowed hard. He wasn't a hero. He was a guy who ran a dusty library and spent too much time arguing with spiders. But something about the book, about his library, felt sacred, and he wasn't about to let anyone, alien or otherwise, take it away. All right, he said, holding the book high. If this library is the gateway, then I'm the one in charge. You want the book? You'll have to take it from me. The Arrender leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could act, the book pulsed with a brilliant light. Callum gasped as he felt its energy surge through him, connecting him to the library in a way he couldn't explain. The shelves, the books, even the dust, all of it felt alive, humming with potential. The portal began to flicker, destabilizing as the library itself seemed to push back against the intruders. The Arrender staggered, their calm facade breaking as the room filled with a deafening roar. What's happening? Callum shouted. The library is protecting itself. Lirien called over the noise. It recognizes you as its keeper. You're in control, Callum. In control of what? But he didn't need an answer. Instinctively, Callum raised the book and shouted, Get out of my library! The light from the book exploded outward, engulfing the Arrender and the portal. The figures were swept back into the void, their protest drowned out by the roar of collapsing energy. In seconds, the portal closed with a final, resounding crack, leaving the library silent once more. Callum stood there, panting, the book still glowing faintly in his hands. Well, he said after a long pause. That was dramatic. The Lirien chirped and clambered onto his desk, apparently unfazed by the chaos. Lirien placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression warm. You did well, Keeper, she said softly. Callum snorted. Yeah, sure. Just another normal day at the library. He looked around at the scattered books and overturned furniture. The library was a mess, but it was his mess, and he finally understood just how much it mattered. So, what happens now? He asked, glancing at Lirien. That is up to you, she said. The gateway is dormant again, but the library remains special. Others may come seeking its secrets. You must decide how to protect it. Callum sighed. Great. No pressure or anything, but as he looked at the silver book in his hands, he felt a strange sense of calm. He wasn't just a guy running a dusty library anymore. He was the keeper of something extraordinary. Well, he said, setting the book carefully on the desk. First things first, we clean up, and then maybe I'll figure out how to install some anti-portal security. Lirien chuckled, and the Lirien chirped in agreement. Together, they began the slow process of restoring the library, a quiet understanding settling between them. The gateway had been closed, but Callum's story was just beginning. And as he shelved the first of many books, he couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged.